Good evening. My name is Darrell Carter, and I am the chair of the Board of Directors for Humanities Tennessee. On behalf of the board and staff, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the opening of the 33rd Annual Southern Festival of Books, a celebration of the written word. Over the next 3 weeks, we will bring you 55 sessions with 125 authors from across the United States, from England and Ireland. We bring these events to you with a mindfulness that it is and has been a very difficult time for many people. We are enormously grateful to the millions of Americans who are providing compassionate healthcare, educating our children, and keeping our country running. Thank you. Our mission is to foster community and civility in Tennessee through public programs that examine and reflect upon ideas, stories, history, arts, and culture. The festival embodies that mission. We hope that you hear new ideas. We hope that you will find that things that reflect your experiences and reality, and that you are enriched by voices and experiences that are not like yours. If you hear things that challenge you, we ask you to remain open. When you have questions, please share them in the comment threads on Facebook and YouTube. They will be answered in real time during the sessions. At all times, we appreciate your engagement, your passion for reading, and your support for this festival. Thank you, and enjoy tonight's session and all those to come. And with that, I throw it to you, our colleague from Dyersburg, Catherine McBride.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carter, and good evening to everybody. As I already said, my name is Catherine McBride. I'm the director of McIvers Grant Public Library here in Dyersburg, Tennessee. And I'm so excited to be here with these incredible authors to discuss their latest works. And of course, also post questions that you can post live to Facebook, and I'll be asking on your behalf. So please go ahead and take advantage of that. Obviously, we want to thank our supporters because this free nonprofit event just would not have happened without Humanities Tennessee, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Ingram Content Group, Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and of course, Parnassus Books. So first, let me go ahead and introduce all three of our authors. First, we have Miss Raquel Vasquez Gilliland. She is the author of How Moon Fuentes Fell in Love with the Universe. She is a poet, painter, and plantswoman, and her bachelor's is in cultural anthropology and a master's in creative writing, though she has also studied fine art, especially painting. Now, she did grow up in West Palm Beach, Florida, but now she lives right here in Tennessee with us, with her family. So welcome, Raquel.
Thank you.
We also have Miss Rachael Lippincott. She lives in Pennsylvania with her wife, dog, and food truck. And I will just say real quick, that food truck generated a lot of excitement among the staff, so we'll definitely be asking you about that. Her bachelor's is in English writing, although she's known that she's wanted to be a writer ever since third grade. And she's talked already about how excited she is to travel after COVID, especially trying out whitewater rafting. So
Definitely.
Hopefully soon. And then finally, Miss Shanna Miles, the author of For All Time, which is going to be released actually 1 week from today on September 28th. So as well as being an author, Miss Miles is a school librarian who lives in Georgia with her daughters and her husband. She has a bachelor's in journalism and a master's in library media. And her loves in literature are quite clear. I was so lucky to read a sneak peek For All Time. So she credits Octavia Butler, Sherry Smith, other authors of diverse science fiction and paranormal romance as her interests. So welcome, Miss Miles.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to start off with a couple questions for Miss Gilliland. Gosh, all right, so just to jump right on in, when I read How Moon Fuentes Fell in Love with the Universe, which of course, as I mentioned, is your latest book, and it just was published in August, I read a couple times that it was described as a romance, but it has so much going on in it that honestly, I really registered the romance as secondary. Moon Fuentes, the main character of the book, she's a teen who's moving through a deeply transitional period, although, of course, what teen isn't? Would you mind describing for us this transition?
Yeah, in the beginning of the book, sorry.
Oh, I don't think so. It looks like you might be muted.
Better?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Big echo in my ear. So,
Oh,
in the beginning
sure.
of the book, Moon Fuentes is like her beautiful Instagram or photogram in the book, influencer sisters photographer, and
Hmm.
she thinks of herself as the ugly sister, the bad daughter, because compared to her sister, she doesn't fit the ideal Western beauty. Now, her sister has light skin, light hair, she's thin and able-bodied, whereas Moon has dark skin, dark hair, and she's fat. And so when we begin the book, to me, that's the largest transition is she learns her worth as the story progresses. And I have had so many people tell me, I can't believe this is considered a romance because to them, the uh, the main story of the book is Moon realizing her worth, and not only that she is beautiful and her creativity is beautiful, but also that her story is worth telling and worth listening to or worth reading. So she gets on a tour bus. This is like the plot, and she's supposed to photograph her sister as her sister tours with other influencers, and she bunks with Santiago, who is very grumpy but also very attractive. And so that's the tension and the love romance in the story. So
Thank you. And what a great place to pause it too without giving away too much, because that development and that journey is what makes the book so wonderful to fall into. So, you know, in my mind, Moon is going through all sorts of different struggles as she is coping and adjusting to things, partly because she's a teen. And so our young readers do have a lot on their plates that they're struggling with. But there were so many elements in the book that I know adults also would be able to relate to at any stage. In particular, the notion of chosen family, and I'm putting that in quotes on purpose, versus the reality of the permanent connection of the family that you start off with. It seems like that term chosen family is used so readily and easily today, but yeah, your characters have these familiar connections that in some ways they're unable to escape, and in other ways they work very hard to reconcile. Would you mind speaking to that idea for a moment? Specifically, is it possible to truly only embrace the connections that you want to have, that you want to make? And if not, how do you think your young readers can find a balance between those two connections, the family you want and the family you have?
wow, I haven't been asked that before.
I'm sorry.
That's a great
Big old
question. uh, well, there's a line in Moon Fuentes that says, maybe love is thicker than blood. And that's a line that keeps coming back to me from readers, is sticking out to them. And it's when Moon is realizing that she needs to cut out abusive family members. And I just feel in my heart that just because someone is your family, blood family, it doesn't mean that they can abuse you and keep getting away with it. They need to apologize and make an effort to try and change their behavior. And if they're unwilling to acknowledge that they're even doing anything wrong, then at some point you need to protect yourself. And if you're a teen, like living with your nuclear family, there's not always an easy way out. And so I feel as though there are different ways to protect yourself, like oh, sorry, my son. Sounds like he got hurt.
Oh, would you like to go check on him?
My husband's with him, so I'm sorry. My mama
Entertaining
instincts are
family.
like so.
I think we can all relate to this right now. At
Yeah.
the very least, every one of us has had some sort of a pet climbing up in the middle of our Zoom meeting. So,
Oh, so in order to protect yourself as a teen, I feel as though you can choose to spend time with people who respect you if you can. Go to places that make you feel peaceful. It might be church or the park or a walk around the neighborhood if it's safe. And also immersing in something that makes you feel like in a flow, like creativity, whether it's painting or drawing or writing or reading, and and focusing on that. And then when you're 18, hopefully you can have the power to be able to choose who you surround yourself with. And I feel like that's a really important and hard lesson. That's also a lifelong lesson because sometimes the people we choose to keep around us change, and then all of a sudden they might not respect us as much. I've had particular issues as an adult, a 30-something-year-old woman, with my a couple of friends who treated me differently after I got a book deal. So there's transitions like that, and they're never going to end. I don't think. I think that's part of being human, and so that's what I hope that readers take away is that you can constantly change who you allow in your life, and make sure they're worthy of you.
and I see definitely Miss Miles and Miss Lippincott nodding their heads as well as you talk. You're absolutely right. It does seem as a teen that you just don't realize that you don't place your context within your struggle, pardon me, within a larger context like that, and understand that's just part of developing, just as you said, throughout your life. So this might be a good time to go ahead and tell our viewers that I've been very sneaky. And I have already gone ahead and posed a question to Miss Gilliland. I asked her if she wouldn't mind reading a portion of her book. And I know that she has her thumb on two different places, but based on what we've been talking about so far, I would love to hear a bit of the book that was the most challenging for you to create. And of course, after you're done reading, I'd love to hear why.
Okay, I have it marked to read just the first chapter. To me, first chapters can be extremely difficult. So I will begin there. Sorry, I lost my page. Chapter 1, The Wild Cosmic Beginning of All Beginnings. Everything has a beginning. And I'm not just talking about things like the shop I ordered my moonstone necklace from, or where it was made, or where the stone itself was quarried. Though that is lovely to think about, isn't it? Perhaps it's from some deep, wild cave pebbled with lake-like stones of moons. But no, that's not what I mean. I'm not even talking about me or my sister or Yuck, the birds and the bees. What I am talking about is everything. I mean everything in this whole wide, wild universe has one beginning. One place where everything, all of matter, converged into a speck, 1 trillionth the size of a period. Let me repeat that because I can scarcely fathom it myself. Everything that exists in all the billions of galaxies, including Earth, with our salty, whale-skimmed seas and herds of elephants strewn on the horizon like gray beads, and piles of electronic junk gathering here and there since what, the 80s? And blue-trimmed plates of arroz con pollo and the nearly fuchsia slices of smoked salmon over a bagel, and all the smooth and metallic skyscrapers and the billions of microscopic organisms in a teaspoon of dirt. Everything. Every last atom and electron and scoop of strawberry cheesecake ice cream was once a fraction of a period. I don't know how scientists have figured something like that out with any certainty, but they have. I mean, if I kept reading astrophysics for people in a hurry, I might know, but I couldn't, not after that sentence. I had to put the book away, and then next thing you know, my library loan was up, and I can't bring myself to touch it again. It's so overwhelming. I mean, a period, probably font size 10-2 or something. Can you imagine how heavy that thing was? How if you'd picked it up, it would have cut a hole right through you? Your mom might have been like, "Oh, Moon, what have you done now?" You know, if she'd cared. And you'd say, oh yeah, just try to see if I could lift this speck of all that is. It'll be okay. As if she'd care. Sometimes I think, what if I could go back to the beginning? What would I do? I could try to touch it, that molten hot little speck, just to say I tried. Or maybe I'd look at it, at this beginning of all beginnings, and ask it, why the heck do the women in our family still have la raíz? The whole reason why I'm the unwanted, ugly sister. I may allow myself another related question. Why didn't I leave la raíz in the carved milk jar, right where Mom banished it on the windowsill in her bathroom? I can still picture the moment, despite Mom warning us with one hand on her Bible and the other basically on the graves of all our ancestors, to never, ever, ever touch the milk jar. I got on my tiptoes, grabbed the white bottle, and pulled the top off, and released all the yuck back into our bloodline, apparently, like a little Pandora in training. Of course, nothing happened at first. I spent years thinking Mom outright lied to us. And then I had sex for the first time. But that's another beginning for another time.
Woo! Yes. All right. I am so glad, actually, that you chose chapter 1, because that gives me a reason to ask one of my questions. I've got so many, of course, but one of them was, right off the bat, you're just boom, struck over the head with the level of poetry and lyricism in your prose. And I kept drawing parallels between your writing style and frankly the plot of the book and magical realism, very similar to if folks are familiar with the book like Water for Chocolate, or the director Almodovar does some incredible things in his films, especially the film Voltaire with Penelope Cruz. So if folks are not familiar with that genre or that style, and I'm going to try to describe it accurately, but it is the act of bringing in supernatural elements into daily life and settings, and they act as movement for the plot. They help to move the plot forward, but the characters don't necessarily recognize these things, or they aren't unusual. It's just part of given life. So I'm curious, did you pull inspiration from that genre and that style? Is that an accurate thing to say?
Yeah, I think I was inspired by magical realist writers and poets, but not consciously. It's something I had read like in undergrad and grad school, but I was really inspired by my family and their practice of folk magic. And this belief that there's like a consciousness in all things and we're all interconnected. And so to me, some of the parts of magical realism in literature, in the Latinx, that's what I can speak to with my family's experience, draws on seeing the world and understanding that there is magic in the world. Then that it's also for us a spiritual connection.
So as you described your inspiration a little bit, I'm also thinking about the choices that Moon Fuentes makes, and the things that influence those choices. And I'd actually like to step back a little to something you had talked about earlier, which was you had touched on the idea of self-worth, self-value. So, she's making some decisions that are conscious. She's making some that are unconscious. And some of them, I read some of her decisions and the ways that she navigates conversations, and I kind of cringe, and I remember what I was like as well. And so I can kind of relate to it. So I'm curious about a few things. So would you say in a way perhaps that you were writing to your younger self? Certainly you're writing to teen readers. And what sort of advice would you give them as they are making those choices? Especially because the mistakes that Moon makes when she does not assign value and worth to herself, they become part of who she is, or at the very least part of her history and her story. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Would you maybe touch on that for a minute?
Sure. I would say the advice I would give readers navigating the book and considering the mistakes Moon makes, including going to young guys and trying to get like validated by them through sex or other interactions like that, which is like a big part of her shame in her history, is that your mistakes do not make you, and you can every day, like she says, a seed becomes a flower and that becomes a seed again. Every day you can make yourself new and make new decisions, and you don't have to let your past or your shame or your mistakes kind of weigh you down. You can start fresh, like my morning glories in my garden.
That is such a wonderful thing to try and remember. It's just so easy to forget that, every day when you wake up and you feel the weight of what's come before you. I think also too, this might be a great time to pivot to our next author, because I'm definitely picturing connections between the two. So I'd like to spend a few minutes and speak with Miss Lippincott, especially about her book, The Lucky List. So just to orient our readers a little bit, The Lucky List follows young Emily Clark. She's living in the small town of Huckabee, which is an incredibly tight-knit community, and 3 years on is still processing the death of her mother. So much of this story seems to be about becoming, and becoming in a very deliberate and conscious way. So we've got Emily, and she's becoming who actually, when we start the story, she's in the process of becoming the person that she thinks she needs to be in order to survive this tragedy. We've got her father, Joe Clark, and I thought that was a really interesting slice of character exploration off to the side there. So he's becoming a man who defines himself as being on the other side of this tragedy. We've got her friends, of course, who are also teens like Emily. So they're all deciding who they want to be. But, one thing I just couldn't make up our mind about, though, was each character's resilience. Was it being developed and created by themselves, or was it, as one of your wonderful quotes in the book refers to, Albert Camus, is it already there and they are just recognizing it for the first time?
Oh, that's such a good question. I honestly think it's already there in a lot of ways. I think for the character of Emily, like you said, her mother passed away 3 years prior, and she really has been stuck in so many ways at the start of the story. For the past 3 years, a lot of her life has been experiencing this grief, and almost kind of everything in her life has been put on pause. She doesn't go out of her way to do things. She doesn't take risks. She doesn't put herself out there. She's kind of disconnected with herself in a very big way. And I really think, kind of like what you said and the quote from the book, I think throughout the summer and throughout the story, there is kind of realizing that, like, all along, this, even though it's been dormant, even though she hasn't kind of connected with this part of herself that took risks, finding her late mother's summer bucket list and deciding to duplicate it, kind of helps bring that out of her, helps bring her to a place where she's able to become the person that she wants to be, that she aspires to be. And it just kind of takes that little bit of push and that little bit of connection to the person that she lost to really help her get there.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I really appreciated right away with your choices about the characters was the time frame that you chose. So as we already talked about, it's 3 years after her mother's death, and it seems like so many stories don't really explore the after of good or bad significant events, whereas The Lucky List is placed squarely inside of the after. It's nothing but that, and it winds up being such an honest portrayal of how tragedy, or of how loss, I should say, deeply affects who we are, who we become. So would you describe for us your thought process as you were deciding where to start Emily Clark's story, or our view into her life?
Yeah, definitely. I think there were a couple elements at work. I think in regards to having it be 3 years after, I think a lot of times with grief, I always kind of think back to moments in a moment in my childhood, in my past, where like, for the first 2 months or first period of time after somebody passed away, people like bring potluck dinners and, kind of are always there. And then, at the 3-year marker, like you still have days where like it hits you heavy, or you still have days where like, you like smell a shirt and it smells like this person that you lost, and it just brings you right back. And it kind of feels like the rest of the world kind of moved on in a lot of ways. But for the character of Emily, in so many ways it appears that she has, but in actuality, she really hasn't. And so I kind of just wanted to kind of start her at this point where, there's this huge idea of like senior year, and especially with her mom, like senior year, I think for her mom, after having done this list that Emily finds, is kind of the year she came into her own. So it's kind of this point in her life where she kind of expects a similar journey or a similar experience. And then at the start of the summer, when everything is in shambles, she's wrecked things with her boyfriend, her best friend's away for the summer, her dad's selling her childhood home. She's kind of, staring at at everything in jumbles. And it just seems like that's not even possible. So I think choosing that point, it was kind of a mix. It was to kind of explore grief, past that point, how somebody still feels it, but also, kind of the experience of this huge marker in her mom's life and this incredibly important person's life to her, and kind of having it look so different from how she always dreamed it would, and kind of how she would then change and kind of get to that point. So yeah, that was kind of how it all came together.
Mm. And you touched just for a moment on how this journey really helps Emily to better understand her mother, who sort of is created as an additional silent character within the plot, which I thought was really, really interesting. And of course, for so many people as we get older, that's part of our process as well, better understanding our parents in a larger context. So I love that there was that little sort of sneak peek for teen readers to start to think about. There's another character that I put into the cast as well, and that was the town of Huckabee. So the first question for you was, why a small town setting?
Yeah, well, I am from Pennsylvania. So I grew up on the east side of Pennsylvania, and then I came out to Western PA for school, and now I'm here for all eternity because my wife has very deep roots here in Pittsburgh, and you never leave, apparently. But yeah, I think, Pennsylvania is just kind of a really interesting state. You drive 15 minutes in any one direction, and it's just incredibly rural, the place where my wife grew up, and also pretty close to where I grew up. I think the thing with Huckabee is you can plunk it down anywhere in Pennsylvania and it makes sense. It's just that kind of place. So I really wanted to try to like capture the essence of like this small town that is super familiar to people that grew up here. You have your like tractor pulls, and you have your like fair every weekend in the fall. And you just have these people like, bingo is super huge, like in this one particular town, and it's kind of like their culture and like what they love doing. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to just give like a little taste of the place that I kind of grew up in, and the chaos of it all, and kind of the magic of it all at the same time. So.
So asking one more question about Huckabee then. So as we've already said, there is such deep levels of resiliency that we get to see slowly revealed in each of these characters. But when it comes to small towns, and our library is definitely in a small town. So I've heard from plenty of folks who say that it's a huge source of comfort and reassurance for them. But I hear other people say that it can be stifling, especially if you add in that element of ownership almost between citizens and residents. So going back to Emily Clark in Huckabee, how much would you say her setting has encouraged or perhaps stifled her development of resiliency?
Yeah, that is such a good question. I mean, small towns are complicated, as I'm sure you know. You have people that it just works for them. Like I have relatives that kind of grew up in a town and they know everybody and they're going to stay there till the day they die, and that's just kind of that's their thing, and they thrive in this community and they're fine. And then you have characters like Emily, where the fact that everybody knows everybody can be incredibly claustrophobic, especially when like everybody knew her mom and everybody knew her family. And, it feels like every single person that looks at her just kind of sees her as like, this is the person whose mom died 3 years prior. And I think it can be really tough. I think for Emily personally, I think having Blake, somebody completely outside of this town, come in and kind of just upend things with a new perspective, and just seeing her with fresh eyes in a way that nobody probably has for her entire life, or at least for 3 years, was huge for her. And I think there's just the reality of the fact that, some people just do need to get out of a small town to, be able to become the people that they want to be, and that they're so desperate to be. Because there are expectations, there's people you've known your entire lives, and I think it could be really tough. So yeah, there's the freedom in getting out of Huckabee for sure.
Yes, absolutely. But definitely, Emily, I don't think it would be too much of a spoiler to say that she achieves her own personal sort of freedom throughout her journey, which is very, very gratifying to see. And I also too want to pose a larger question that I had, and I often have when I'm looking at young adult literature. So in the past 5-10 years, we've seen a huge, wonderful explosion in the number of fictional characters that would identify along a wide spectrum, of sexuality. And this gives me hope, for our future. But at the same time, then when I do have those occasional conversations with people who have far less tolerance or accepting views and ideas and opinions, those conversations are just that much more jarring. So I'm curious to hear what you think. Is the industry following demand, or are we in part sort of trying to create the world that we really want?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think we have definitely seen such a huge explosion. There's no denying that. And I'm so thrilled to see it. I remember obviously like back in the day, like there was no young adult fiction books featuring LGBTQ plus characters. And now there's thankfully a bunch released every single week. And I think it's so amazing to see. I think it's been positive. And I mean, I think that's definitely absolutely been so positive. I'm really huge on Book Talk, which has been, I think, such a cool thing to see, all the teens that are going on there and making these accounts and talking about all the books that they're excited for. And it's just been really interesting, I think, to get their perspective on what they want to see more of, and what they're excited about, and what books they're kind of getting behind within the industry, especially LGBTQ+ books. So I'm excited to see what happens in the years to come. I hope we get more voices from more perspectives and more people. And that's genuinely just what I hope for.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be able to witness this transition. So, all right. Well, it killed me to stop hearing from Raquel. It's going to kill me to stop hearing from Rachel, but I'm keeping an eye on the time. And so now I'm going to transition and ask Miss Miles a few questions. So Miss Shanna Miles, her book, For All Time, going to be released so soon. I'm going to try my best and tread very carefully and not reveal a single spoiler. I hate it when people do that to me. So I'm not going to do it to anybody watching. So because of that, Ms. Miles, would you please do the honors and describe your book for us?
Okay. So Tamar and Fayard are in love in 14th century Gaul, in 1920s Philadelphia, on a space colony during wartime in the 24th century, and even today. When Tamar starts to have dreams about a past life with a boy she can't get out of her head, they'll both have to risk their lives for their future, and even a planet to set things right.
Okay, thank you so much. So that lets me know all the questions I can ask, which are a bunch. That's fantastic. All right, so first of all, one question I had that I would love to know is, how did you choose your settings?
Well, I had quite a few settings, and I wrote before I wrote for all time, I wrote a historical fiction romance that was set in 1860s South Carolina, around in Charleston, and not really the fun loving time period for her Black people, but I still wanted to do historical fiction, and I still love it. So I was like, well, let's see what other areas in the time that have not really been explored for historical fiction for young Black characters. And so I ended up hopping around, and there were some that I didn't explore in this book that were kind of cut, and there were others that made it. So what you see, is those who survived the bloodbath.
Okay. Oh gosh, now of course you have me so curious about what those other settings are. You're gonna have to someday publish a revision with an additional,
With everything.
an apocryphy at the end. So, all right. So in that case, so obviously we're talking about different settings and in different eras. So elements of time travel to it. So for those who are looking forward to her book, of course, you're going to be very, very pleased. At the end is a wonderful section of discussion questions for readers, which I love it when that's included in. And so I'm actually going to pose one of those questions back to Miss Miles. I think you've done a masterful job of giving your two main characters a universality. And so they're all able to transition, into these different eras and into these different settings, and yet while always remaining themselves. Unfortunately, though, Black characters rarely appear in time travel settings. Why is that?
I think that we're not really given the opportunity to appear in these settings because we have been taught, at least in America, only one story. And that story is full of sadness and tragedy. But even during times of tragedy and sadness, we exist and we still find love and we still find joy. And, everything isn't always about the oppression that we live in. Because, in the context of global colonization, imperialism, just who's in power in one way or another, there's always going to be someone who's under the thumb of the government. But we know it seems that in America, we're not allowed to give ourselves the opportunity for those stories. And then that's only 400 years. You're talking about the entire globe. So there are one of those sections that I had was, we see some in the book, which is a tiny little section of Black, our characters Tamar and Fayard in France during the Revolution. And there were Black people that were there during that time. And that because we hear about like Sally Hemings' children who are in France while and one of our founding fathers, I'm forgetting his name. Jefferson, Monticello. So before he gets to Monticello, he's in France with, his with Sally Hemings and her brother. They are there, but they're also there with free Black people, the gens de couleur, who were in New Orleans at the time, which is a whole separate area where you could get into, where you could talk about this 100 years of history and romance and strife and drama. There's all these stories that just have yet to be told.
Such rich, fertile ground for reaping and sowing. So, yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. So I also asked Miss Miles if she would read a portion of her book. And so I'm excited to hear about this. This time around, though, I asked Miss Shanna if she would read the portion that she was most proud of. So if you wouldn't mind doing that now.
Well, I feel most proud of my ability to create really lovely intros into the sections of time that they're getting in, because you have to get into the sections really quickly in world build because there's so many. So this is our introduction to Fayard in Philadelphia in 1924, the first time we hear him speak. Dawn is the best time for escapes. The smell of maple and pillow-soft dough tickles my nose and coaxes me from sleep. Someone is making pancakes. Through the open window, the breeze brings mystery and the clang of the streetcar, the bubble of the working man's coffee pot. At dawn, you can blend in with the folk on their way to work. The hustlers are done for the night, and the drunks are sleeping the drink off. The sun isn't really up yet, and if it is, it looks like a woman laughing. Her head turned up just enough that you can't see her face, like she's got a secret that's about to bubble right out of her. A cool breeze blows the lace curtains in from the open window, along with the sound of the early morning autobuses rolling by. I wipe the crust out of my eyes with my left hand. My right one's pinned under a warm, sleeping angel breathing feathers across my neck. Her heavy thigh is hooked over my stomach, pinning me down. I don't want to move. It's not that I don't like to slip out on a girl unnoticed. Better the memory of me than the real thing. It's just that I'm so comfortable. Even with the price on my head and knowing her daddy could come home at any minute, I slept like a baby. I lean over and kiss her forehead. She stirs a bit with a weak smile and yawns, cupping her hand over her mouth to hold in the stink. Now that ain't that cute.
Thank you so much. I think one of my favorite bits is being able to smell pancakes through the window and hear the trolley car. That is absolutely wonderful. So you've already mentioned it, and in a variety of different ways, it's become clear in your answers. But I'm going to go ahead and point to one thing in particular that I would love to hear your opinion about. And it took me forever to develop this question, so I'm actually going to just straight read it from the paper, make sure I get it right. So there's so much talk these days, and in a good way, about authentic voices, about authors writing with an authentic voice. But on the other hand, or in addition, it's so important, at least for me as a reader, I'm certainly not a writer, but as a reader, it's important to create realistic and diverse characters, a diverse cast of characters, if you want to truly world build. So when a book's characters, even the minor supporting ones, are entirely homogenous, or when a character's minority status is pointed out and therefore alerts me to the whiteness of everybody else, which I might not have assumed up until that point, it really throws me out of the plot and it alienates me. And I find that unbelievable. So therefore, isn't this a skill that all authors should develop? And is that possible? Is it possible to create those characters whose lives are affected by their minority status in a very authentic and realistic way by authors of all backgrounds?
I think the authenticity of the text should reflect the authenticity of the writer. So if I don't want someone who does not see marginalized people to then try to shoehorn them in, because then you'll be seeing something that is surface, and you may represent them in a way that is not respecting of their humanity. So if you are a Black or white person, or a cis straight person, and you don't have any LGBTQ friends, and you don't know anything about that community, don't try to just make the secretary trans and let that lie and say, oh, it's diverse. Don't you try to make the best friend, just dip the best friend in, some chai, and the best friend is Indian now, and we never address their family. We never address anything authentic about them, but you've just, kind of taken a crayon over them and made, them part of your story.
Mm-hmm.
So speak to what you know, write what you know. And yes, it would be a criticism of you to say, oh, there's not enough diversity in your writing, but that would be because there's not enough diversity in your own life. And that's a personal thing that you would need to do, and not something that you would need to address in your writing.
Thank you very much for that. I love too that you're giving wonderful advice to people who are inspired by your works, and of course that of Miss Raquel and Miss Rachel, and want to perhaps take up the pen themselves. But of course that sort of advice is pretty universal, regardless of what you're interested in doing. Broadening your experiences enriches what you're able to create and produce. So thank you. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I do see as well that we have just one other quick question. So let's see. It looks like someone has posted a question on our Facebook page, and I'm going to let anyone answer this. The question is, where do you get your ideas?
I'll hop in.
Okay, I was going to start calling on names.
Ideas come from everything. Reading mostly, cutting and pasting. Wanting to, especially for some of us from marginalized communities. There's a big talk like there's. Vampires are dead or fantasy is dead or this, that, and the other. It's like, but we haven't seen, ourselves in this particular genre. So you may say, I haven't seen myself in this. So let's see what I can do with it. What kind of twist can I put on that? So we're reading all the time. I'm reading all the time. And a lot of times it comes from that. I would like to see myself in a story that I don't see myself. Or I would like to, mash things up, and do like a what if, on some of the stories that I read. And that's a good way to find ideas.
Thank you so much. We have no time left. I've been told to wrap it up. It's because I was enjoying myself too much. But thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Gilliland, Ms. Miles, and Ms. Lippincott. And for everyone at home who's viewing this, we're so happy that you joined us for this In Conversation. Yes, there it is for all time. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you again.